Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. First John chapter 4, verse 1. Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to the channel. I want to begin the program by asking a question. Did God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of homosexuality? Now, you might think that that is a easy question to answer. Like me, I am confident that many of you, especially those of you who are around my age and in the 60s, have heard that homosexuality was the reason why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Yesterday, I was sitting in a church service. The pastor got up on the podium. I actually thought he was doing a pretty nice sermon, a meaningful sermon. And then he said the following.
You know, Sodom was not destroyed because of homosexuals. Okay. Now, there were homosexuals there, and the Bible did speak on this, but in Ezekiel 16:49 and 50, it says, "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy." That's what was her sin. She didn't aid the poor and needy. They were haughty and did an abomination before me. Yeah, that could be included in abomination, okay, if you want to. So I removed them when I saw it. I remember I was talking to a guy at Starbucks one time, a few years back, and he was saying, talking, yeah, well, aren't you against gays and homosexuals because the Bible, God destroyed Sodom for it. And I said, well, you could be upset with gays and homosexuals if you want to, but you can't use that argument because it clearly states the guilt of your sister Sodom was, and it tells you reasons that are not saying homosexuality. Okay, so I'm just telling you that. All right, don't use that anymore. But the reality is, whatever was going on there, and that may be included, but whatever was going on there, it clearly states one of the things is that the people were doing what they wanted to do on the backs of other people.
The pastor begins by stating emphatically that God did not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of homosexuality. The sounds a little low to me, but that is exactly what he said. And he doubled down on it. When he was reading, if you go back and look, he was reading, he got to verse 50 in Ezekiel. Then he kind of seemed like he stumbled on that when he got to the word abomination, but then he went on through, he kind of made this statement like, I guess if somebody wanted to try to use that, they could. But then he goes on and gives a little story about a gentleman he once met. And then when he gives that story, he's going back to his original point, which was that homosexuality had nothing to do with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then, of course, he points to the Bible, to the scriptures, particularly verse 49, to clearly give the impression that the Bible endorses what he had just said, which is that the homosexuality had nothing to do with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Definitely something I think worthy of consideration. So let's look. This was by no means the first, and I doubt very seriously the last time that I will hear someone say that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah had nothing to do with homosexuality. Now, I say it's not the first time because as soon as the pastor said it, he caused me to have a flashback. He called me to flashback to the early 90s when I was in college. I was in a class, and during that class, the professor said exactly what the pastor said in his sermon, which was homosexuality had nothing to do with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then a few years back, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I was talking to a coworker, a friend. This coworker has a family member who is a lesbian, but the coworker told me that that was okay because they spoke to their rabbi. This coworker was Jewish, and the rabbi assured her and her family that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah had nothing to do with homosexuality. Let's look at it and let's see if the Bible does not give a definitive answer to that question. We do not have to guess, no speculation required on why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, because the prophet Ezekiel tells us again, this is what the pastor read. I want to read it again just in case it was not loud enough. He read Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 49 and 50. Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom: pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Verse 50, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw good. If we go to Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 22, this is what the Bible says. Now, whether we agree or disagree with it right now, at this point, to me, that's irrelevant. I'm just saying this is what the Bible says. Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination. In Leviticus chapter 20 and verse 13, it states, if a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. So the Bible puts homosexuality in the category of an abomination. I mean, it just simply does. Whether we get mad, happy, glad, or sad, it's not going to change the fact that it does. And since it falls into that category of an abomination, then when we go back to the inequities of Sodom and Gomorrah, because that word abomination includes a lot of things. It's not just homosexuality. There's a lot of things that fall into the category of abomination. All you have to do is put in the word abomination in a computer, and you'll see all the verses that come up that has something to do with abomination. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse 5, which states, the woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. When looking in the book of Ezekiel, Ezekiel gives 5 reasons for why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Those 5 are pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness. They failed to strengthen the hands of the poor. And finally, they were haughty and committed abomination. It seems to be definitely worth noting that when we go to the book of Genesis and chapter 19, and we read about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, it does not give an example of their pride. It does not give an example of their gluttony, which is the fullness of bread. It doesn't give an example of their abundance of idleness, that they fail to strengthen the hands of the poor. It gives an example of an abomination. And the abomination that it gives an example of is the one pertaining to a man wanting to sleep with another man. We call that homosexuality. After reading Genesis 19, which states, but before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. This sexual immorality was so prevalent throughout the regions of Sodom and Gomorrah, it impacted the old and the young. The word pedophilia is not in the Bible, but it clearly seems like, based on Genesis, that there was pedophilia taking place between older men and younger boys. Genesis chapter 19, verse 4 through verse 7. However, I recommend reading the whole chapter. Because of the word abomination, the pastor stated that it being homosexuality, could be included as a reason for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Contrary to what the pastor said, it's it's not whether or not it can be included, it is included. And despite the fact that the word abomination comes up last, does not take away from the fact is most likely the reason why that specific form of abomination is mentioned just before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, rather than everything else that was mentioned by the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 16, verses 49 and 50. Is not. The federal government actually has a law that states whenever you produce something, some type of food or some type of beverage, and you have to list the ingredients on it. And when you list the ingredients by law, you have to mention whatever ingredient is in that product the most, it has to be mentioned first. And then the second thing you put in there the most is supposed to be the second thing on the ingredients label. And the third thing you put in is the third. So it goes from the greatest or the most product that was put in that package down to the least amount of one put in that package. I think we have to be careful and not make the false assumption that just because the word abomination comes up last in Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 50, that is somehow it is the least or the smallest reason why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and therefore we can essentially dismiss it. When we go back and look at Ezekiel, you can take a equal sign and put it between each of those things that he mentioned. Because, and let me just try to hopefully make it simple. He destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah for all the reasons that Ezekiel mentioned, and the abomination of men sleeping with men, we call it today homosexuality, was one of those reasons. Or as the old expression goes, you often hear people say, this is last, but by no means least. It is one of the many reasons God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah according to the Bible. Unlike my other programs, I want to end this one with a test question. So the question is, why did God destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? The answers are A, pride, B, fullness of bread, C, abundance of idleness, D, neglecting the poor and the needy, E, homosexuality, and F, all of the above. Now, a true and false question.
I remember I was talking to a guy at Starbucks one time, a few years back, and he was saying, talking, yeah, well, aren't you against gays and homosexuals because the Bible, God destroyed Sodom for it. And I said, well, you could be upset with gays and homosexuals if you want to, but you can't use that argument because it clearly states the guilt of your sister Sodom was, and it tells you reasons that are not saying homosexuality. Okay, so I'm just telling you that. All right.
True or false? I understand for many this is a sensitive subject. When I can recall back in the day that if you were homosexual, you would lose your job. Now we have gotten to the point where if you say anything about homosexuality, you can lose your job. And so I understand that. But what the Bible says is simply what it says. And whether a person wants to believe it or not believe it, even if they don't, even if they want to believe in the Bible and or not believe in the Bible, right? In other words, if I was an atheist and I were to look at that information, if I look at it objectively, I could only come to the conclusion that whether I like it or not, that was one of the reasons why God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah from a biblical perspective. So thank you so much for listening. As always, I would love to know what you all think. So let me know. Hit me up in the comments section. As always, I hope you had a beautiful day and if not, a better tomorrow. Thank you and goodbye.
When losing weight, people tend to focus on exercise and a diet plan. Seldom, if at all, do they include God. Without God, no weight loss plan is complete. Watching and praying the weight away is more about gaining a closer relationship with God rather than losing weight. The purpose of this book is to keep you motivated until you have reached your goal and keep the weight off. The book is on Amazon.